Thanks, Liz. So I've got the brief opportunity here to wrap us up, and I'm going to tell you from the developer standpoint or from the design build contractor standpoint, what are the things that we see with the SPA process, what are the best practices, and what is our approach when we get that conditional award or NTP1. And so for fear of being too repetitive, and I promise I wrote this myself, but I'm going to talk about communication, talk about schedule, and then also talk about commitment to following the processes and paying attention to detail. The first one, communication. Not gonna, like I said, not gonna dwell on the fact that it's important, but you saw the hub and spoke diagram that Carrie did earlier. That really we need to break down the middlemen. We don't want to have to go to a person, to go to a person, to go to their contractor. If a person over here in this office on one side of town needs to talk to a person in a different office, or a designer or a person in our office, let's go ahead and get them in touch directly. Let's make those introductions, set up zipper plans, figure out who's going to talk to who in the event that things need to get escalated, and do that as early as you can. Establishing expectations, figuring out what the rules are. TxDOT has specific expectations for how a package is to go through the process, how the forms are supposed to look, how they're supposed to be dated, and we have an opportunity at the beginning of the project to align ourselves with them through the project management plan. So on a CDA or any of the design build projects, the PMP submittal is one of the first things you do. So you get NTP1, you get the PMP approved, and then you get your NTP2, and you can go, you're off to the races. Without that, it's very hard to guess what is intended or what is wanted. And that goes both ways. And so we'll submit that, we'll get feedback, it'll result in a bunch of flowcharts and very specific naming conventions. And if you don't have that figured out at the beginning, it's painful, and it's kind of, you know, we chuckle, but it's a big deal, because you remember the Visa commercial where there's people walking through the store paying with a credit card, and then all of a sudden one person pays with cash, and it's like chaos. So once the machine is up and running, it's got to be well oiled, and it's got to keep going. The workshops are another benefit, and Liz talked about consistency. That's something that we look forward to when we bid projects, whether it's here or El Paso or wherever. It's consistent, you know, plus or minus a few details. And we do have the PMP and an opportunity to refine those expectations. And it's not going to be perfect from the beginning. So if the plan changes, stop, change the plan, get everybody on the same page, and keep moving forward. The task force is what we call them. Really, it's just specific meetings at the coordination level to do day-to-day business. And it's important that the folks that are going to those on a regular basis are empowered. You've got to select the right people that have the right information, that can have the technical details in mind and the qualifications, but can also maybe see the big picture, and you make decisions and you keep moving to progress the project, to address issues. And don't hesitate to exercise the escalation process. If you get to a stalemate, don't sit there and argue. Escalate it out of the room and let people above you, people above them resolve it if it is a big deal. Next, I want to talk about schedule, because I wouldn't be the contractor in the room if I didn't bring this up and have a whole slide on it. This is a quote. I actually have this on my desk, but it's a kind of a keyword quote. But what gets measured gets attention, and that goes for everything from the way we track and the way we communicate and give status updates, the way that we apply detail in our schedules and we run scenarios and look at it. If you're not tracking those, if you're not measuring yourself against deadlines and goals, then you're not paying attention to the details that are going to get you in trouble, that are going to cause the project to suffer unnecessarily. So we use P6, as I'm sure everybody does, but it's not just an ordinary schedule. When you've got a developer that's signed up to design, build, finance, operate, maintain, I mean, you have tens of thousands of activities, including all of the individual activities, you know, making up the right-of-way acquisition process. But on the front end of that, you've got the awards, the contracts, the NTPs, the permits, you've got environmental clearance, you've got things driving the front end, you've got design, then you've got the process itself, the acquisition process, and on the tail end, you've got utilities, you've got frontage road work, bridges, walls, traffic switches, everything else. I mean, you could follow a chain of activities all the way to the very last activity in the job to substantial completion. And you have to have that level of detail. I'm not aware of another way to do it, because it may surprise you. You may, if you don't go through that exercise, you may be working on the wrong priorities. And we spend a lot of time up front really understanding the process, really refining who's going to get what at what step, so that we know what to plug into that middle area to identify the duration of these acquisitions. And we're going to have to make assumptions because it's not always perfect, and it's not always something that you can just nail. Talking about dates, it's great to have dates and deadlines and hard dates, and really we sign up and typically there's a fixed number of days that we have to deliver a project. But on an individual basis, you know, setting short-term goals, meeting in the task force setting with your counterparts, and being able to monitor your progress against those short-term goals, that you're working on the right priorities is the most important, because you've got fixed resources, you've got title people and appraisers and surveyors and designers, and they can't just work on every parcel at the same exact time. And if you make a decision and you spend 3 weeks working on something that's a low priority just because you failed to really understand how it fit into the bigger picture of the job, then you lost those 2 weeks, or maybe you have some other impact to the project. So it's important to take a wholesome or a big picture outlook at the overall job and what you're doing today and how it affects things that are happening 3 years from now. And also being realistic. Don't confuse being realistic with being overly conservative and being able to use it as a crutch. And you know, right away is hard to schedule, so we're just going to give you a date that's way out there because we know we can hit it. Let's pick something that's realistic, maybe on the aggressive side, and let's do everything we can to hit it. There's certain things that are in our control. You know, that's from the developer and all of our contractors and from TxDOT and all of your subsidiaries and other groups that you work with. And there's a lot of things that are out of our control, but you know, we surely need to control the things that we can, and we'll leave the rest of it up to whoever. And then building the initial schedule it's a difficult task, and it takes a lot of man hours and time and analysis, but I'll say it's kind of the easy part. The hard part is maintaining it on a regular basis. If you learn an update, you know, we have a task force meeting, or we get a report from an agent or something, and this parcel is going to do this or that, or we heard about this, that information needs to go back into the schedule immediately, and they hit F9 and run out a new schedule, and you see what the repercussions are to the job, and you react. And so you've got to maintain that. It's got to be a living, breathing document and tool that everybody can use to know the status of the project. Because if you don't, you're just guessing, and you can't afford to do that. And lastly, process-driven and attention to detail. I've said it enough probably, but in the PMP, we're going to do flow charts. We're going to figure out exactly what that process is, and we're going to dive in and commit to following it. And you know, we need to track internally so we know where we're at. So we've got all of our second-tier subcontractors under control. We've also got submittal requirements and reporting requirements to TxDOT for reporting purposes. But missing a detail could result in big impacts, could result in compliance issues with following all the rules and regulations, and then have schedule impacts too. So committing to those processes, and also using the fact that it's design build, that we've got designers in-house, challenging assumptions, working with them when the time is right, when the design is still in a point where you can ask, you know, what about this curb return radius, or what about that sidewalk, and when there's opportunities and optimizations that can happen, you know, that's why it's design build, is because we get to take advantage of those optimizations early on, and hopefully it lessens the impact of the right-of-way acquisition and utilities and everything that comes after that. And then starting with the end in mind, you've got a developer that's turnkey service, you know, providing these services. So for us internally, and also amongst our TxDOT counterparts in the task force, you've got to visualize what's going to happen when we go out to this property and say, you know, our public information group says, okay, on Tuesday of next week, when we have possession, we're going to saw cut right here and move your driveway. And, you know, that is when the truth comes out was every private improvement considered? Was all the driveway, cross access, control of access? Was there fire vault accounted for? I mean, there's tons of details that are going to get found out eventually. And so we've got to pay attention to detail up front and make sure that we address those appropriately so that they don't surprise us later. That's it. Back to you.
Couple closing points here before we go. I think it's important to note that Ryan was talking about days on the schedule. That costs TxDOT SPD right away roughly $50,000 a day if we give bad advice or slow the process down. Last fiscal year, ending August 31st, we spent over $500 million in right-of-way and utilities. And with that, let me close with this last slide. With that territory, over $500 million, we're closely watched. You saw a video earlier of the Lost American Statesman and with one of the local channels. We're closely watched by the media, by the public, by the legislature across the street. We get regular audits from the Federal Highway Administration. We get state audits, whether they because of public concerns or from the legislature. We get bond market auditors because they want to make sure that the money is being used wisely for the bond investors. TxDOT internal audit, they come and look at our processes, TxDOT processes, and then the external audit comes to look at our partners and our developers. So with that, any questions for the panel?